There is a game being played all around you. A game with invisible rules, unspoken expectations, and prizes that somehow always seem to slip through your fingers the moment you think you've won them. You've been playing this game your entire life. You learned the moves before you could even speak. You memorized the strategies before you understood what you were competing for. And somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask the only question that truly matters. Who decided these were the rules in the first place? Thomas Merton spent years in silence, years watching the world from the inside of a monastery, stripped of everything society tells us we need to be complete. And from that stillness, he saw something that most people spend their entire lives running from. He saw that the game itself is an illusion, not because achievement doesn't exist, not because effort is meaningless, but because the version of success we've been handed, the version we chase with our hearts pounding and our minds racing, was never designed to make us whole. It was designed to keep us moving. And movement, when it has no direction, is just another form of standing still. Listen closely. This isn't about abandoning ambition or retreating from the world. This is about something far more radical. This is about learning to see through the fog that surrounds every choice you make, every goal you set, every fear that keeps you awake at night. This is about discovering that the life you've been trying so hard to win might not be the life you actually want. And the person you've been trying so hard to become might be standing in the way of who you already are. The game of life, as it's commonly played, operates on a simple principle. More is better. More money, more recognition, more security, more control. The logic seems airtight. If you can just accumulate enough of the right things, if you can just climb high enough on the right ladders, you'll finally arrive at that place where anxiety dissolves and contentment begins. You'll finally feel like you've made it. But here's what no one tells you. That place doesn't exist. Not because you haven't worked hard enough, not because you haven't sacrificed enough, but because the destination keeps moving. Every time you reach it, it shifts. Every time you grasp it, it transforms into something else you need to chase. The game isn't designed to be won. It's designed to be played, endlessly, exhaustingly, until you forget there was ever anything else. Merton understood this trap intimately. Before he entered the monastery, he was a young man hungry for the world. He wanted to write, to be recognized, to matter in all the ways society teaches us to matter. And he pursued those things with the same desperate energy that drives so many of us today. But something was wrong. Something was always wrong. The achievements came, but the peace didn't follow. The recognition arrived, but it felt hollow, like applause echoing in an empty room. This is the first crack in the game, the moment when you realize that getting what you want doesn't feel the way you thought it would. The moment when success tastes like sawdust in your mouth. Most people experience this and immediately conclude they simply haven't wanted the right things yet. They adjust their goals. They refine their strategies. They convince themselves that the next achievement, the next milestone, the next version of themselves will finally be the one that satisfies. But what if the problem isn't what you're chasing? What if the problem is the chasing itself? There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living someone else's life. It's different from physical tiredness. It's deeper. It settles into your bones like a cold that never quite goes away. You can feel it in the morning when you wake up and immediately reach for your phone, searching for something outside yourself to tell you how to feel about the day ahead. You can feel it in conversations where you perform a version of yourself you've rehearsed so many times it almost feels natural. You can feel it in those quiet moments, rare as they've become, when the noise stops and you're left alone with a stranger who wears your face. This exhaustion is a message. It's your deeper self trying to get your attention, but the game teaches us to ignore these messages. It teaches us to push through, to optimize, to hustle, to treat our own discomfort as a problem to be solved rather than a wisdom to be heard. Merton's great insight was that most of what we call personal growth is actually just becoming better at pretending. We don't transform. We adapt. We learn to wear more convincing masks. We become so skilled at playing the roles expected of us that we forget there's someone underneath the performance. And that someone, the one who existed before the game began, is slowly suffocating under the weight of everything we've piled on top of them. The hack, if we can call it that, isn't about winning the game more efficiently. It isn't about finding better strategies or more effective techniques. The hack is stepping outside the game entirely, not physically. You don't need to join a monastery. You don't need to abandon your responsibilities or withdraw from society. The stepping outside happens in your mind, in your perception, in the quiet revolution of seeing things as they actually are, rather than as you've been conditioned to see them. This is harder than it sounds. Much harder. Because the conditioning runs deep. It started before you had words to describe it. It was woven into the fabric of your childhood, embedded in the expectations of your parents, reinforced by every institution you've ever passed through. By the time you're old enough to question it, the conditioning doesn't feel like conditioning anymore. It feels like reality. It feels like the only way things can possibly be. But consider this. Every society in history has had its own version of the game. Every culture has defined success differently, valued different qualities, chased different prizes. If the rules were absolute, if they were written into the fabric of existence itself, wouldn't they be the same everywhere? Wouldn't they be consistent across time and place? The fact that they're not tells us something crucial. The game is invented. The rules are arbitrary. The goals we sacrifice our lives for are not natural laws, but social constructs, stories we've agreed to believe because everyone around us believes them too. This isn't cynicism. This is liberation. Because if the game is invented, you have the power to invent something different, not by fighting against society or rebelling for the sake of rebellion, but by quietly, persistently, choosing to live according to values that actually resonate with your deepest self. By refusing to let external measures of success define your internal sense of worth. Merton wrote about something he called the false self. This is the identity we construct to navigate the world, the collection of roles and achievements and possessions we point to when someone asks who we are. The false self isn't entirely bad. It serves a function. It helps us operate in society, maintain relationships, get things done. But problems arise when we mistake the false self for our entire identity. When we forget that underneath all the construction, there's something more fundamental, something that doesn't need to achieve or acquire or prove anything to simply exist. The true self, in Merton's understanding, isn't something you create. It's something you uncover. It's been there all along, buried beneath layers of expectation and adaptation. It doesn't depend on external circumstances for its peace. It doesn't need the world to arrange itself in a particular way before it can feel complete. It simply is. Finding this true self isn't a project with a deadline. It isn't another goal to add to your list, another achievement to chase. It happens through subtraction, not addition, through letting go, not grasping tighter, through becoming quiet enough to hear what's always been whispering beneath the noise. And this is where everything changes. Because when you begin to operate from your true self rather than your false self, the game loses its power over you. Not because you stop participating in the world, not because you become indifferent to outcomes, but because your fundamental sense of identity no longer depends on those outcomes. You can work without being enslaved to results. You can strive without being destroyed by failure. You can engage fully with life while remaining free from its ability to determine your worth. This is what Merton discovered in his years of silence. This is the hack that transforms everything. It's not about changing your circumstances. It's about changing the place from which you meet your circumstances. It's about realizing that the prison you've been trying to escape was never made of external bars. It was made of beliefs, and beliefs, unlike bars, can be questioned, examined, released. Think about the last time you felt truly at peace. Not the manufactured calm that comes from distraction or numbness, real peace. The kind that doesn't need anything to be different than it is. For most people, these moments are rare, fleeting. They happen by accident in unexpected gaps between the constant striving. A quiet morning before the world wakes up. A conversation where pretense falls away. A moment in nature where something larger than yourself makes itself known. These glimpses aren't accidents. They're windows into what's possible when the game temporarily releases its grip on your consciousness. They're evidence that peace isn't something you achieve at the end of your journey. It's something you access when you stop journeying so frantically. When you realize that where you are is already enough, that who you are is already complete. The world will tell you this is dangerous thinking. It will say you're being naive. That competition is natural, that ambition is necessary, that if you stop pushing, you'll fall behind. And in a certain narrow sense, the world isn't wrong. If you define success by the game's own measures, then playing by its rules is indeed the most efficient path. But efficiency toward a destination you never chose isn't wisdom. It's just well-organized captivity. Merton was once asked what he thought the great tragedy of modern life was. His answer wasn't war or poverty or injustice, though he cared deeply about all of these. His answer was that people no longer know what they want. We've become so conditioned by external voices, telling us what to desire, that we've lost contact with our own wanting. We chase goals we didn't choose. We fear failures that only matter within a game we didn't design. We spend our lives climbing ladders, leaned against the wrong walls, and we're so busy climbing we never stop to check. The hack begins with a pause. A real pause. Not a productivity technique disguised as rest. Not a strategic break designed to help you work harder afterward. A genuine stopping. A willingness to feel the discomfort that arises when you're no longer moving. Because in that discomfort, something important reveals itself. In that stillness, you begin to hear the voice that's been drowned out by all the noise you've mistaken for necessity. What does that voice say? It's different for everyone, but it usually speaks of simple things: connection, presence, meaning that doesn't depend on recognition, love that doesn't require earning. It speaks of the life you would choose if you weren't afraid, of the person you would be if you stopped performing. Most people never hear this voice because they never get quiet enough. The game keeps them occupied. When they're not working, they're consuming. When they're not consuming, they're worrying about working. The spaces where insight could enter are filled with noise, and after enough years, the noise starts to feel like silence. The busyness starts to feel like peace. The running starts to feel like standing still. But you're different. You're reading these words, which means something in you already knows. Something in you is already questioning. The very fact that you're still here, still listening, means the hack has already begun, because awareness is the first crack in any prison. Once you see the bars, you can never quite unsee them. Once you recognize the game for what it is, you can never quite lose yourself in it the same way again. This is both the gift and the burden of awakening. You gain freedom, but you lose a certain kind of innocence. You can no longer be a true believer in the systems that once gave your life its shape. You can no longer find comfort in goals that you now recognize as arbitrary. There's a mourning that comes with this, a letting go of the person you thought you were supposed to become, a grief for the life that was mapped out for you, the life that would have been so much simpler to follow. But beyond the mourning, something else emerges, something quieter, something that doesn't need simplicity because it has found peace in the midst of complexity. Something that doesn't need answers because it has learned to live with questions. This is what Merton called contemplation, not as a religious practice, though it can include that, but as a way of being in the world. A way of meeting each moment without demanding that it be different. A way of seeing that doesn't immediately categorize everything into useful and useless, good and bad, success and failure. The contemplative sees the game and chooses not to play. Not through anger or rejection, through understanding, through recognition that the game was never going to deliver what it promised, through compassion for all the players still caught in its grip, yourself included. Because here's the truth about hacking the game of life. You don't hack it once and you're done. You hack it again and again. Every day brings new temptations to fall back asleep, new seductions that whisper you could have more, be more, matter more if you just tried harder. The conditioning doesn't disappear just because you've recognized it. It runs too deep for that. What changes is your relationship to it. You see it arising, you feel its pull, and you choose moment by moment whether to follow it or not. This is not about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about catching yourself mid-game and remembering that you have a choice. It's about falling back into old patterns and treating that falling with gentleness rather than self-punishment. Because the game's greatest trick is convincing you that even your awakening needs to be achieved, optimized, perfected. That even your freedom needs to be earned. And it doesn't. It's already yours, it's always been yours, you just forgot. And remembering isn't a mountain to climb, it's a letting go of all the weights you've been carrying without questioning why. Merton spent decades in this remembering. Even in the monastery, even stripped of worldly ambition, he found new games to play. The game of being the most holy, the game of being the most insightful, the game of being the best at renouncing games. He wrote honestly about these struggles, not because he had transcended them, but because he understood that transcendence isn't the point. Presence is the point. Showing up fully to whatever is happening, including your own imperfection, including your own tendency to forget. This honesty is itself a form of hacking. The game depends on pretense. It depends on everyone maintaining their masks, performing their roles, pretending they have it together even when they're falling apart inside. When you refuse to pretend, you disrupt the entire system. Not aggressively, not by attacking others who are still playing, but simply by being real, by admitting what you don't know, by showing your struggles instead of hiding them, by treating your own humanity as something to embrace rather than overcome. People are hungry for this, more hungry than they know, because almost everyone is exhausted by the performance. Almost everyone suspects, somewhere deep down, that the game is rigged. They just don't know what else to do. They've never seen an alternative modeled. They've never met someone who lives differently, who seems at peace without having won all the prizes, who radiates something they can't quite name but desperately want. You can be that person. Not by becoming enlightened in some dramatic way, not by having all the answers or achieving some permanent state of bliss, but by doing the simple, radical thing of showing up as yourself, by refusing to let your worth be determined by external measures, by treating every moment as an opportunity to remember rather than achieve. The game of life that no one taught you isn't the one you've been playing. It's the one that exists beneath all the games. It has no rules because it doesn't need them. It has no winners or losers because comparison isn't part of its structure. It has no destination because arrival is recognized as illusion. This game is played in the present moment, only in the present moment. And the only move is attention, full, undivided, loving attention to whatever is here. When you give something your complete attention, something magical happens. The boundaries between you and it begin to dissolve. The separation that seemed so solid reveals itself as thought, as construct, as another move in the game you've stopped playing. In that dissolution, there's an intimacy with existence that no achievement can provide, a belonging that no recognition can manufacture, a peace that no security can guarantee. This is what the mystics of every tradition have pointed toward, not as doctrine to believe, but as experience to discover. Merton found it in Christian contemplation, but he recognized it in Zen Buddhism, in Sufism, in traditions he'd never practiced, because the experience itself is prior to all traditions. It's what the traditions are trying to express. And it's available to anyone willing to stop long enough to notice. The irony is profound. You've spent your life searching for something that was never missing. You've been running toward a destination you never left. The peace you want, the meaning you crave, the sense of finally being enough, these aren't things you acquire. They're what remains when you stop acquiring. They're the ground that was always beneath your feet, while you were busy looking for higher ground. So how do you hack the game of life? You stop playing. Not the outer game, necessarily. You can keep your job, maintain your relationships, pursue your projects. But you stop playing the inner game. The one that says your worth depends on outcomes. The one that says you need to become someone else before you can be at peace. The one that says the present moment is just a stepping stone to some better future that keeps receding. You start where you are, with what you have, as who you are. You treat this moment, this very moment, as if it were enough. Because it is. It always was. You just couldn't see it through all the noise. Merton died unexpectedly, far from his monastery, at a conference where he was meeting with monks from other traditions. He had spent his life questioning, struggling, falling back into old patterns and waking up again. He never claimed to have arrived anywhere final. He just kept showing up, kept being honest, kept pointing towards something he could never quite capture in words, because words themselves are part of the game. What he left behind isn't a system or a method. It's an invitation. An invitation to question everything you've been told about success and failure, about winning and losing, about what makes a life worthwhile. An invitation to discover that the bars of your cage are made of beliefs, and beliefs can be examined, can be released, can be transformed into something that sets you free. The game will continue. It has its own momentum, its own logic, its own seductive power. Other players will wonder why you've stopped taking it so seriously. They might even feel threatened by your peace, as if your freedom somehow judges their captivity. Be gentle with them. You were there once. You understand the fear. But don't let their fear become yours. Don't let the world convince you to fall back asleep. The awakening, partial and imperfect as it always is too precious to trade for another round of a game you know can't be won. In the end, life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. That's another of Merton's gifts. The recognition that our constant solving, our constant optimizing, our constant trying to figure it all out, is itself what keeps us from experiencing what we're looking for. You can't think your way to peace. You can't achieve your way to wholeness. You can only stop and notice. And allow yourself to be exactly where you are, which is exactly where you've always been trying to get to. The morning will come tomorrow as it always does. You'll face choices and challenges and all the ordinary demands of human existence. The game will extend its invitation. The voices will whisper their urgencies, and you'll have a choice. The same choice you have right now. The same choice you've always had but didn't know you had. You can keep playing, or you can remember. The true self doesn't need the game. It never did. It's been waiting for you, patient and eternal, beneath all your striving. It doesn't care about your achievements or your failures. It doesn't measure you against anyone else. It simply loves you. Not as a reward for good behavior, not as an outcome of correct beliefs, but as the most natural thing in the world. As natural as breathing. As natural as being. This is the hack. This is the secret that no one taught you because most people don't know it themselves. The game was never real. Only you are real. And in recognizing that, everything changes. Not the outer circumstances necessarily, but the place from which you meet them. The ground on which you stand. Welcome home. You never really left. But let me tell you something else. Something that Merton himself discovered in his years of contemplation. The journey inward, this hacking of the game, doesn't make you less effective in the world. It makes you more effective, not in the frantic, anxious way the game demands, but in a way that's sustainable. In a way that doesn't burn you out or hollow you out or leave you wondering what all the effort was for. When you operate from your true self, your actions become clearer. Your decisions become simpler. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter, on battles that don't need fighting. All that energy you were spending on the performance becomes available for actual living, for creation, for connection, for work that genuinely serves rather than work that merely impresses. This is the paradox the game never reveals. The less you care about winning, the more freely you can give. The life you build from this place may look similar to the life you were building before, or it may look radically different. What matters is the quality of presence you bring to it, the freedom that accompanies each choice, the peace that remains even when things don't go as planned. There's a particular kind of strength that comes from having nothing to prove. It's different from the strength of achievement, which is always conditional. This strength is unconditional. It doesn't fluctuate with circumstances. It's the strength of someone who knows who they are, not because they've accomplished something, but because they've stopped looking to accomplishments for the answer. Merton called this strength a kind of poverty, the willingness to be empty, the recognition that all our accumulations are attempts to fill a hole that can't be filled by adding more. The hole can only be transcended by recognizing it was never a hole at all. It was just another thought, another move in the game. Think about the people in your life who radiate something you can't quite name. The ones who seem at ease in their own skin, who don't need to dominate conversations or prove their worth. These people have hacked something. They've found a way to operate from a different place. A place beneath the noise. And you can feel it when you're near them. You can become that person. Not by imitating them, but by discovering what they've discovered, by making the same journey inward that they've made. The path isn't hidden, it's just quiet, waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere. The game teaches us to look outward for answers, to seek experts, authorities, systems, techniques, and there's a place for all of that, but no external source can give you what you most need. No book, no teacher, no system can hand you your own awakening. They can point toward it. But the actual seeing happens inside you. No one else can do it for you. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because you can't outsource the work. Liberating because you don't need anyone's permission. Everything you need is already available, and the right direction isn't forward or upward, it's inward. And then, from that inward place, outward again. A compassionate outward that sees other people not as competitors, but as fellow travelers waking up in the same cell. The world needs more people who have hacked the game, not to form a new elite, but because the game left unchecked is destroying things. It's destroying the planet through endless consumption. It's destroying communities through endless competition. It's destroying individual human souls through endless striving. Something has to change, and it changes one person at a time. One awakening at a time. You might think your own awakening doesn't matter in the face of such large problems, but consider the alternative. Consider what happens when people who haven't done this inner work try to change the world. They bring their anxiety into their activism. They bring their need to win into their compassion. They recreate the same dynamics they're trying to fight against. The game continues under a new name. Real change flows from people who have changed themselves first. Not perfectly, but enough to act from something other than fear. Enough to respond rather than react. This is what you're cultivating when you hack the game of life. Merton never saw himself as separate from the world, even in his monastery. He wrote about war and racism and nuclear annihilation. He corresponded with activists and artists and politicians. His contemplation wasn't escape. It was a different kind of engagement. An engagement that began from stillness rather than from reaction. An engagement that sought understanding before it sought victory. This is available to you, whatever your life looks like. The hack doesn't require special conditions. It begins now, here, with this breath. It begins with the simple decision to stop running long enough to see where you actually are. Where you actually are is here. It's always been here. The game convinced you that here wasn't enough, that the present moment was just raw material for a better future. But the future never arrives. There's only ever now. The hack is recognizing this, living from it. The anxious voice in your head will object. It will say you're being irresponsible, that you're giving up, that you're letting people down. This voice is the game speaking through you. It's terrified of what happens if you stop playing, and its terror makes sense within its own logic. But its logic is not the only logic. Its reality is not the only reality. There's a deeper logic. A logic of sufficiency rather than scarcity. A logic of presence rather than perpetual preparation. This logic doesn't deny achievement or growth. It just stops making them conditions for peace. And this brings us to perhaps the deepest hack of all. The recognition that you are already what you seek. The peace you want is your own nature. The freedom you chase is your birthright. The meaning you hunger for is woven into the fabric of your existence. You don't need to earn these things. You don't need to achieve them. You just need to stop blocking them. We block them with our beliefs about inadequacy, with our stories about what needs to happen before we can rest. These blocks are made of thought, and thought, when it's seen clearly, loses its power to imprison. It becomes just another phenomenon, coming and going, no more substantial than a passing cloud. The game told you that you were insufficient, that you needed to add things to yourself before you would be whole. This was always a lie, a useful lie for the game, but a lie nonetheless. You were born whole. You will die whole. The wholeness remains. It's what you are. Merton spent his life pointing toward this, not because he had mastered it, but because he had glimpsed it. And the glimpsing changed everything. It's changing you too, as these words settle into whatever part of you is ready to receive them. The seed is planted. The crack in the game has widened. And one day, maybe today, you'll be walking through your ordinary life and something will shift. The heaviness you've been carrying will lighten. The urgency will ease. Not because your circumstances have changed, but because you have. Because you've remembered what you forgot. And in that moment, you'll understand why Merton smiled in photographs. Why he could write about the darkness of the world without being crushed by it. Why his silence spoke louder than most people's words. You'll understand because you'll be standing in the same place he stood. The place that was always here. The place that was always yours.